Okay, geweldig. We are up to Taf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, but let's just quickly review what we learned yesterday. Yesterday, we learned about the chiyuv to do giluach by mitzayra with a tar. When we discussed 2 days ago the halacha of a Nazir's mandatory giluach to be with a tar, the Gemara ended up saying that the way we know Nazir has to be megalech with a tar is because when it says tar lo yavar al roishay ad malois, that teaches us that by the malois, the Nazir needs to use a tar. But the Gemara had a havamin at that point that the source of the fact that by a Nazir the giluach has to be with a tar is from a tzayir. Yet the Gemara brought a brisa that seems to tell us that the makor of tar by mitzayra is from Nazir. So that would be a circular logic. You can't say that we know tar from Nazir by mitzayra, from mitzayra, and the source of mitzayra is Nazir. That doesn't work. So because of that, the Gemara said, in fact, there's a machlokas tanoim as to whether or not, as to where we know tar from by mitzayra, and as to whether or not we learn it from Nazir. Clearly, the Gemara who had a havamina to learn tar of Nazir from mitzayra must have held that the makor of tar by mitzayra must be an independent source. And in fact, the Gemara illustrated as follows. There is halacha, you're not allowed to cut your beard. But this halacha is told to us by the Torah in two places. It's told to us by Kohanim, and it's told to us by Yisraelim. By Kohanim, it says, it uses a lashon of giluach. And by regular Yisraelim, it says, so Chazal teaches from there that in order to get clear what the prohibition of hashchasa zaken is, we have to have two factors. It has to be hashchasa, and it has to be giluach. So it has to be cutting it with some type of utensil, some type of tool that also completely eliminates the hair. The Gemara tells us that the only type of giluach that meets these specifications are the tar. So we've clarified that the isur to cut one's beard is only with a tar. It says in the parsha of Mitzayra, that when he's going through the process of being matar himself, he has to cut off all his hair. And the pasuk tells us, "V'haya b'yoyim hashavi yigalach es kol saray es roishay v'sekanoi v'skabeseino." So the question is, if the Torah already says that the Torah has to cut off all his hair, why does the Torah have to itemize? We're focusing on zakanoi now. Why is zakanoi itemized? It must be to tell us that what if this mitzayra is a kohen, and now he has two prohibitions. He has a prohibition of the kohen, he has a prohibition of Yisrael, and he has the asay of the kohen of the kiddushtoi. So how do you know that when the Torah says a mitzayra in his entire process cuts his hair, how do you know he also has to cut his beard? The Torah it says a kanai. Since the Torah didn't need to itemize a kanai, yet the Torah did itemize a kanai, it shows that no matter what type of isurim you're up against, there's a chiyuv asay for a mitzayra to cut his beard. From the fact that by mitzayra, the Torah is telling us special that you're allowed to cut his beard, and the reason why the Torah is telling us that you're allowed to cut his beard is precisely because the method with which you're instructed to cut his beard is prohibited. And since we know the only method with which cutting your beard would be prohibited is with a tar. It must be that the chiyuv of cutting your beard when you're a mitzayir in the entire process has to be with a tar. So you see mitzayir independent. This would be your blessing. You see the mitzayir independent of any other of Nazir or anything else. We know that the chiyuv mitzayir has to be with a tar, and the way we know that it has to be with a tar, is because the Torah specifically by mitzayir tells us cut off the beard, even though there's an isser, and we've established that the isser is with a tar. That's how we know, according to the Rabbanon. That's how we know, according to the Rabbanon, that mitzayir needs a tar. So that explains the Gemara we had 2 days ago that had a havamina to learn Nazir from mitzayir, because mitzayir has an independent source to teach us that it needs to be vitar. That's the Gemara that we learned yesterday. Now, this whole thing is based on the fact that the prohibition to cut your beard is only with a tar. And as we learned in the Brisa yesterday on Daf Mem Amud Beis, that's the Chachamim, that's the Rabbanon, the Tanakhama, it's none. So this whole shtickle works very good according to Rabbanon. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, we wouldn't have a raya from there. Because Rabbi Eliezer Aimer, afilu liktai b'malkat uberehitni chay. Rabbi Eliezer holds that any method with which one destroyed his beard would also be chay. And if that's the case, then you don't have a raya that when it says kanoi to tell you that by a mitzayir, even though there's isurim involved, cut his beard anyway, you don't have a raya that it means batar, because any way to cut his beard would be a violation. So therefore, you don't have a raya that by mitzayir it's dafka with a tar that he's mechuyev to cut his beard, because you need Shkali to tell you that you're allowed to cut it anyway, because regardless how you will cut it, it will be being over alav. So those are the two shittas, the Rabbanon and Rabbi Eliezer. So we still have to clarify how, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we know by mitzayir that the chiyuv of giluach is only with a tar. According to the Rabbanon, we know, because the Rabbanon learned from Zakanai, since the Torah tells you, no matter what, cut the beard, and we know there's only an issue to cut the beard with a tar, so you have a raya that by mitzayir, the chiyuv is to cut the beard with a tar. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, the issur of cutting your beard is any method. Well, then how do you see that by mitzayir, just because it says a kanai, that it has to be with a tar? Maybe it can be with anything. That's where we're up to right now. And if you remember, we were going to say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, in fact, the makor that by mitzayir you have to use a tar is from Nazir, since he doesn't have a raya from zakanai, and he doesn't have a raya from zakanai, because the prohibition to cut your beard is with any method. Therefore, we need to find another source for mitzayir that you have to use a tar, and that source will be Nazir. Now, if you remember, we also learned yesterday, we also learned that there was a mahatzad. The Gemara, the Brisa brought down a mahatzad to teach us that mitzayir needs a tar, because we learned it from giluach of Levim, which need a tar, and giluach of Nazir, which need a tar. And we said these two things together could teach us that by mitzayir you need a tar. If you try learning from Levim alone, you might say you can't bring a raya from the Levim, because Levim have a special process. They even have to be picked up themselves. There's tufan gufa. So you can't bring a raya alone from Levim, but we have Nazir Yechiach, which doesn't need such a process. But if you want to learn only from Nazir to mitzayir, Mala Nazir, that its carbon needs lechem. It's also more of an involved thing. So the Gemara said from a joint effort between the Levim's giluch, which has to be with a tar, and the Nazir's giluch that has to be with a tar, we could also learn mitzayir. That's what the Brisa said. And if you remember, Rava asked Akasha, Rava from Barnish asked Akasha and said the Ma'atzar is not a good raya because there's something unique about Nazir and Levim that does not apply. That does not apply. There's something unique about Nazir and Levium that does not apply to Mitzvah, and that is there's no carbon dollars. By Nazir and by Levium, there's a specific carbon. It's not adjusted based on your wealth. Mashenga by Mitzvah, there is such a concept. So therefore, maybe you shouldn't be able to bring a raya from Levium and from Nazir as a joint effort that Mitzvah is Batar. So according to the Rabbanon, we do know how Mitzvah is Batar. We learn from Zakanoi. Now we're on the prowl to find out how does Rabbi Eliezer know that by Mitzvah, the Chiv Giluach is Batar. And that's what today is going to be about. So let's see the Gemara on the top of that Mem Aleph Amar Aleph. Rabbi Eliezer, my time. Rabbi Eliezer who holds that by the issue of Giluach Zaken, it with every type of utensil, it's not only with a tar, and therefore Mitzvah can't learn from there that the Chiv Giluach by Mitzvah is Batar. How are you going to know that? So let's see the Tosfos inside. Rabbi Eliezer the Amar, afilu liktei b'malakit urehitni chayiv b'paas the zaken. Rabbi Eliezer who holds that the issue to shave your beard is not only with a razor, it's with any utensil, and therefore umechayiv b'paas the zaken afilu b'shar maschisin, and he holds you're going to be chayiv malchus even if you pull your beard out, and therefore the shaper istrich ziknai de mitzayra. We still need ziknai of mitzayra to tell you the dochi lav dash zaken, that when you cut your beard, no matter how you cut it by a mitzayra, it will still be a violation of the lav of ashkos zaken. Behind nami b'shar maschisen, which could be with any type of utensil. So you don't have a raya that by mitzayra you need to use a tar. So therefore, minolei taglachas to mitzayra the dafka betar. How will Rabbi Eliezer know that the taglachas of mitzayra has to be dafka with a tar? Zok to Gemara, we have another place to learn it from. Zok to Gemara, Yalif Meroishay. Now, if you remember in the pasuk, there's three things that the Torah itemizes. It says, so we spoke a lot about Sakanai, but Es Roisha is also extra, because it says Yigalachas Kol Sa'aroi, Roisha would be included. Why does the Torah have to specify Roisha? It must be that there's some Isurim involved in cutting off the hair of his head, and the Torah is telling us, even though there's Isurim involved, a Mitzayra should do it anyway. And let's see what those Isurim are. Zokta Heilige Gemara. The Tanya we learned, Roishai. It says Roishai as one of the items listed that has to be cut. The hair of his Roish has to be cut in the process of Tahirus HaMitzayra. Ma Talmud Loimer. Why did the pasuk have to tell us? Is it not already included in his Kol Sarei? Because maybe this fellow who is a Mitzayra is also a Nazir, and a Nazir is prohibited from cutting his hair. So the fish and Gabi Nazir, Tar lo yaver al roishoi. It says by a Nazir, Tar lo yaver al roishoi. So let me ask you a question: the prohibition by Nazir of Tar lo yaver al roishoi, does that apply to any hair removal method, or does that only apply to a tar? How is a Nazir prohibited to remove his hair? Is he prohibited to remove his hair with any keli, or is only prohibited to remove his hair with a tar? Anybody? What is the prohibition of a Nazir to remove his hair? Anything. So we actually had a machlokes 2 days ago, and there was a machlokes between Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Yosy. So let's look back to that machlokes, which was on Lamites Amud Beis, and we had a Tanu Rabbanan tar, ainli el tar, tola shmir tzivsev kol shuminayin. Rabbi Yosy held that the prohibition for a Nazir to cut his hair is any method, but Rabbi Yosy argued. Rabbi Yosy said tar ainli el tar mirit tola shivsev kol shu potter. So we have a machlokes tanoim if a Nazir is prohibited from cutting his hair with any method, or is a Nazir only prohibited from cutting his hair with a tar? Rabbi Eliezer in our sugya that we're about to learn is going to hold like Rabbi Yosy, that the only issur for a Nazir to cut his hair is with a tar, but a Nazir would be able to remove his hair using any other method. With that in mind, let's now see how Rebbe Eliezer learns by Mitzoyra that the Chiyuv is with a tar. Because it says Roshai, Ma Tamid Loimar. Why did it say Roshai? And we just said that this is going according to Rabbi Yonason, that it's only a tar that's usher for a Nazir to cut his hair with. So Yochol Af Nazir Mitzoyra came. I would have thought that even if a Nazir is a Mitzoyra and his Tahira process of Tzaras mandates that he cut his hair, maybe Lo Yaver al Roshai, maybe you have to waive that process, that part of the process, and you don't cut the Nazir's hair if he's in the process of becoming Torah from Tzaras. You know why? Because it says Tahir Lo Yaver al Roshai. And by the way, there's also an assay there. It says Kodesh Yeh Gad al Peres HaRoshai. So there's an assay and a loisha. So don't tell me, I say because by Nazir there's both an assay and a loisha. So you would think, sure, normally a Mitzvah has to cut his hair, but the care of his head. But a Nazir, if the Mitzvah happens to be a Nazir, then he wouldn't cut his hair. Even though he's a Nazir, and by completing the process of Mitzvah and cutting this fellow's hair, you're going to be over the lab and the license of a Nazir, you still should do it. That's the Rosh. I'm going to break it, it pauses it. But that means you can't count, but you're still usher. You still have all the prohibitions of Naziris, you just don't get to count those days. So now we can use the same cheshbon that we used yesterday in the Rabbanon. From the fact that the Torah by Mitzvah has to tell you, from the fact that the pasuk by Mitzvah has to tell you, you should cut the hair of your head because it might be usher, is a raya that the chiyuv to cut the hair on the head is in a case where it's usher. Where is it usher? Let's look. Where is it usher by Nazir? According to Rabbi Yonason, it's only usher with a tar. So I have now a raya from Nazir to Mitzvah that the chiyuv taglachas is with a tar. So now we have the two options. According to the Rabbanon, the Mekar of Mitzvah is from Pa'as Zakein. So Mitzvah is independent of Nazir, and therefore we could have had a Havamim until we Nazir from Mitzvah. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the halacha that we know by Mitzvah, you need a tar, is actually from Nazir, because Roshai is only based on the fact that by a Nazir, it's only usher to cut his hair b'tar. Correct the Gemara, Dilma, the same kasha that the Gemara asked yesterday. Maybe Roshai doesn't tell you that you're mechuyev to use a tar. Maybe the word Roshai is telling you that you're allowed to use a tar. Dilma la'olam, afilu liktoy b'milket u'berhitni mitzvah kavet. Maybe, in fact, to be mekayim the chiyuv of taglachas by mitzvah, you can use any method. V'chitema tar lamali, remember? And if you're going to tell me the Roshai, which is telling you that you can use a tar even though it's violating this or Naziris, maybe it's just telling you the afilu b'tar. Maybe it's just telling you afilu b'tar. In other words, there's many different ways you could be mekayim the giluach by a mitzvah. But since it says Roshai, it's telling you if you choose to use a tar, you would be allowed to, even though it violates Naziris. I would have thought, since normally a Nazir who shaves his head with a tar is chayiv to allow to say, maybe Gabi Mitzvah Nami l'chayiv. If a Mitzvah chooses to do it that way, he'll be chayiv as well. Kamash Melandaloi. Roshai tells you that you could even use a tar. Zok to Gemara, it doesn't make sense to say that, using the same svara we said at the top of the Amud to forever this very same kasha, according to the Rabbanon yesterday. We saw the daitach ki avid b'melakit uberhitni mitzvah ka'avid. If you're going to tell me that you could be mekayim the chiv tagalachas by mitzvah without being over the prohibition of Naziris by using a tar, with the likes of tar, Kirish Lakish, unless the Torah specifies specifically that by mitzvah it has to be done with a tar, which the pasuk didn't, how could you argue that you would be able to violate the license and the say if you have a way around? Rish Lakish told us that you will never ever allow an assay to be mevatel a loisaseh if it's possible to fulfill the asay without being over the lois asay. So if you're going to learn by Mitzayra that you could make taglachas in any which way without being over the Naziris, nothing in the world will convince us otherwise. And you for sure would never be able to use a tar by Mitzayra. Because why should you? If you could be Mekayim the mitzvah without violating the Naziris. Therefore, it must be that the only way to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Giluach by Mitzayra is through a tar. And therefore, the Torah says, even though in this case, this Mitzayra happens to also be a Nazir, and by using a tar on the head, in order to be Mekayim, the Chiyuv Taglachas by Mitzayra, you're going to be violating his Chiyuvim for Naziris. The Torah says, Roshai, do it anyway. So now we have both sides of the coin. We have two different options of how to learn that Mitzayra, the Taglachas of Mitzayra, has to be B'tar. You either learn it from the Taglachas of the Isser Zaken, but that only works if you hold that the Isser Taglachas by Zaken is only with a tar, which was the Chachamim, or you learn it from Naziris, but then you're going to have to learn, like Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yonason, that the Isser to cut your hair by Naziris is also only with a tar. Beautiful. Prekter above Rabbanon, Hai Roshai, my Darshibe. The Rabbanon, we used Zekanoi to tell us that even though you're using a tar and you're being over a lav and an asay by kahuna of Giluach Hazakin, of Ashchas Hazakin, you still should do it when you're a Mitzayra. But what did the Torah say Roshai for? It can't be because to teach us this halacha that even if it's a Nazir, because first of all, what's the chiddush? We already know this halacha. We already know this halacha that the Mitzayra is the tar. We already know it from Giluach Hazak. So Zok to Gemara, you know what the Rabbanan will use it for? Mibaylahu lemitchi lavdakaf. They'll use it to teach us that the chiyuv of the Giluach and the Mitzayra is doicha the lav of a kaf. The Tanya we learned, lo shakibu pas roishkem. You're not allowed to cut off your payas. Yachalaf Mitzayra kain. I would have thought a Mitzayra can't either shave off his payas, even though that's part of the process. Let's have a look at the Heligatoses. Zok to Gemara. Roishay matamad loymar. About 5 lines up in the skinny lines of Tosis. Roishay matamad loymar. Roishay dechsiv b'Mitzayra. The Roishay that's listed in Mitzayra. Why did the Torah have to specify that? But like farksiv b'Reisha dekra, yigalachas kol sa'iroi. So therefore, as Roishay be'ziknoi matamad loymar. Zok to Gemara. Lefish and Amar Gabi Nazir. Tar lo yavar al Roishay. Toichim en yizurusoi. Oh, I'm sorry. This is going back. This was Rabbi Eliezer Shita, which we explained already. I apologize. I want to go further down to the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon, which is 5 lines from the bottom, all the way to the bottom in the large lines. The Rabbanon, the nafkalula taglachas the mitzayra bitar miziknoi kidalail roishay lamali. The Rabbanon who hold that taglachas the mitzayra is bitar. How does he know it? From Ziknoi, like we learned yesterday, Roshai Lamali, what is the prat of Roshai mentioned in the Chiyuv Taglachas for Mitzayra? The Bishtam of Rabbi Lazar, it's Roshai Lamelef Minei, the Taglachas, the Mitzayra Batar. But Rabbi Lazar, as we just illustrated, uses the word Roshai to teach us that the mitzvah of Taglachas by Mitzayra has to be Batar. El Rabban Lamalu Roshai, because the Rabban already learned that from Zekanai. So to Gemara, you know what the Rabban used Roshai for? Mibaylahu lemitche lavdakaf. Af b'mitzayra she'ein Nazir. Even by a mitzayra who's not a Nazir, a regular mitzayra, you might think that he's not allowed to cut off his payas. The Itzrucha Loimar, the dochi lavdakaf. It teaches us that it's doicha lavdakaf. And we're soon going to see that they learn asay doicha loisaseh from this very halacha. They learn asay doicha loisaseh from the fact that a mitzayra can cut off his payas. The Tanya Lachakivu Pas Roishchem, Yochel Af Mitzayra Kain. I would think a mitzayra may also not cut off his payas. I Vadich Siv, Vadikasa Vegilachas Kol Sa'arai. It means Chutz Mi Pas Harosh. Well, after fatayich, that when the Torah says a Torah has to cut off all his hair, it means all of the hair that's permissible for him to cut, excluding the payas roish. Oikishamirit pas roish. Or maybe it would be speaking if he pulled it out. There's an extra word, roishai, by Mitzayra, that's listed off. Lashmina, to teach us, that say the Vigiluch, the Mitzayra, Dochi Lav, the Kavas Aroish. So the Rabbanim are going to learn the halacha of Asay Doich Aloisese from here. We know the classic case to learn Asay Doich Aloisese is from Gedilim Tas Halacha, even by Shabbos. And we're going to soon see that's going to be how Rabbi Eliezer learns. But according to the Rabbanim, Roisha here teaches you, in fact, that Asay Doich Aloisese. So you might ask, if Zakanai tells you that Asay is Doich Aloisese Vasay, so once I know that already, why do I need a pasuk to say that I say the Aloisese? So the Tosfos is going to explain. We'll see how much time we have to learn it. Is that if we wouldn't know the lesser chiddush that I say the Aloisese, then you wouldn't have learned that the case of Zakana is for a kohen. You would have said it's only referring to Yisrael, where there's only a Aloisese and not an Asay. Okay, Gaval. We'll see when we get into the limit from Gedilim, if it's a raya, if it's not a raya. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. The ikas of Roishai will like Ksiv Zakanai. What if I said Roishai and didn't have Zakanai? Havamina, I would have thought, Mash Matarti, the Osya say, V'doichas Loisese, Umashma da Akafas Kalaroi Shma Akafa. There's another very important piece of information here. Who said that cutting all the hair on your head is violating There's actually a big machloikis if the Isser of L'Shakivu Pas Roishcha means only cutting off your payas, or if it means even if you cut off all your hair. There's a sheet that holds that if you cut off all your hair, including your payas, there's no Isser of L'Shakivu. L'Shakivu is only if you're cutting off only your payas. And the explanation Tosfos gives, maybe we'll have time to see them as well, is if you only cut over here, right, and over here, so then you're sort of making a circle around your head because you have leftover on top, maybe left some leftover on the bottom. But if you cut everything off, it might not be considered a hakafa. So from the fact that the Torah by the Torah tells you Roishai to teach you that you're allowed to do a kafa, and we know by Mitzayra you're taking all your hair off, you have a raya that Lo Shakivu Pas Roishcha means even if you cut off all your hair. And it also tells you that I say the Aloisese. Right? Because if the Isra of Lo Shakivu did not include a prohibition of taking off all your hair, then it wouldn't be a problem with Mitzayra at all. Mitzayra would be irrelevant to it. You don't need to him for it. Because it wouldn't what we're asking a Mitzayra to do doesn't violate anything. It's only relevant if what we're asking a Mitzayra to do does violate Isra Kappa. Then Rosh tells you, do it, violate it, because I say the Aloisese. Dr. Gemara, Akati B'tar Minavam. How do you know that the chiyuv to cut off the hair of Mitzayra has to be with a tar? According to Rabbanan, for that you need to tell you that the chiyuv by Mitzayra to cut your hair is only with a tar. Dr. Gemara weiter. Rabbi Lazar, the Asiyah say, Rabbi Lazar, how does he know Asiyah say? Because he used Roishai in a case where there was a Loisese Vasei, right? He used Roishai to tell you that if Mitzayra is a Nazir and a Nazir is prohibited because of a Loisese and an Asay to cut his hair, you still have to cut your hair if you're a Mitzayra. So how does he know Asay Doich Loisese Greda? So Gemara Yalef Migadilim, he lived out of tzitzis. It says in the pasuk Loisilba Shatnes. So let's see the pasuk inside. It says in the Loisilba Shatnes, Tamer Upishtim Yachtov, and then right after it says Gedilim Tasalocha. Let's see the Bach who reads it for us. It says Loisilba Shatnes, Tamer Upishtim Yachtov, Hagedilim Tasalocha Mehem. But Gedilim, tzitzis you can even make out of wool and linen, out of Shatnes, so you have a raya that I say Doich Aloisese. Gewaltig. Let's see the run inside of Gedilim Tasalacha, and we're going to have time. We'll be able to learn more of the runs, more of the Toshasin. But first, I want to get through the basics. Yalef Migedilim, the Samchei Rachmana Tzitzis Laklayim. The Torah placed the chiyuv to put on tzitzis to the parsha of Klayim. L'meimer to teach us that say the tzitzis, the mitzvahs say to wear tzitzis or to put tzitzis on your begodim is dochi loises of the Klayim will be doicher the lois of Klayim. Okay, this is already a little complicated, so we're gonna pass this for now.
Why don't we say you don't have to use Klayim? You could use the same material as the beged itself.
Well, the limit is you're and you're allowed to make tzitzis even if it is Shabbos. So you're asking me, it's possible to make tzitzis without being over Shabbos. That's what you're asking me.
That's right. So why wouldn't we say that lechatchila you should make it without being over Shabbos? And if you have no choice, then you have an aseh dachilosase.
And you're asking more, and your shlokish supports you. Your shlokish says
right.
You could be the kaim daseh without violating the lois aseh. You should do it that way. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But the limit is from the fact that the Torah says make tzitzis right after the chiyuv of Shabbos to tell us that the Torah wants us to make tzitzis even if it's Shabbos. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the big was the Torah says you're allowed to make it from Shabbos.
Is it?
When it's discussing Shabbos.
So do we understand it as lechatchila you should make it Shabbos, or b'diavad if you did it Shabbos it's okay?
You're allowed to. It will work. You're allowed to.
But not that you shouldn't do it lechatchila.
Well, midaraisa it's allowed. The Rabbanan said don't. But midaraisa it's 100%. 100%. There's no in daraisas. There's no lechatchila b'diavad. The Torah is clear cut. Yes, no. So the Torah says yes.
No. But the Rabbanan said not to do it.
Yeah.
So, but the Rabbanan wouldn't say not to do it if it was the optimum way of fulfilling the mitzvah.
Well, the Rabbanan are probably saying don't do it because they're afraid you'll use Shabbos somewhere else. The Torah says, you make the student. I'm telling you yes, no. You make the student. That's right. So the Torah gave the responsibility of these gedorim to the Rabbanan. But I'm sorry. I understand. So I'm going to have to do some research. Why don't you have a Rish Lakish over here? So I'll have to see that. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. Omar Mar. The Rish Lakish says whenever you have an asay no loisaseh, and it's possible to be mekayim b'asay without violating the loisaseh, there you don't say asay dechalitzah. So here's the Torah telling you beferish. Here it's different. I hear okay. Omar Mar. All of these people, so we were talking about the Nazir, we were talking about the Mitzayra, and we were talking about the Levim. If they made Giluach without the tar, is that who we were talking about? Let me make sure I'm not making a mistake. The Brisa listed off the three people that have a mitzvah Giluach. Nazir, Mitzayra, Levim. Yeah, so it was that. So any one of these that did their Giluach, Shaloi B'tar, they didn't use a tar, or they forgot to cut 2 hairs. That's not called a giluach. Rabacha said in the name of Rabika, from here we know that Rubai Kikuloi Midairaisa. You see this concept that we have, that Rubai Kikuloi is a Dairaisa Dike halacha. How do you see that? Mimai. By Nazir, the Torah went out of its way to tell us, where we learn that every single hair has to be cut off. So we dash in Hachahu, Dafka by Nazir, where the Torah went out of its way to teach us the Adi Kakuloi. But anywhere else, Haba Alma, Ruba Kakuloi. So everywhere else we would say Ruba Kakuloi. Let's see Toshus inside. The Torah didn't need to tell us that. The Kvarsiv Vigilach. It already says Vigilach. So why is the Torah repeating itself? This taglachas has to be complete without any hairs left over. So we say Hachahu the boy kulay. Amar Aram to the Alma Kaimi, Miu Pasokin, Aminun Toif, Amitznia, the Malik. I'm not sure what this means. I'll have to look. I didn't have a chance to get trying to the sources. So I'll have to come back to it. But I'll call upon him. You have a raya that Rubai is Kekuloi everywhere else because the Torah told us by Nazir every single hair has to be cut. Matzka Flora Yosy, Berab Chanina. Hi, but Nazir Tomek's it. I don't understand. The pasuk that you're bringing down of B'yoy Mashvi Yigalach is referring to Nazir Tomei, not Nazir Tahar. So what's the right that it's extra? The first pasuk of Yigalchenu was speaking by a Nazir that was Tahar. The second pasuk that you quoted is by Nazir Tomei. Well, they didn't like this kasha. Machaku Allah b'marava. They laughed at this kasha. They laughed at this kasha of Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda. Because what's the difference if it's said by Nazir Tomei or by Nazir Tar? They're interchangeable. Michti. Nazir Tomei, the betar minolam. How do you know that a Nazir that became Tomei, so in his process, he shaves his head? How do we know that needs to be a tar? Doesn't say anything about tar there. It's Nazir Tar Yalef. It's because by Nazir Tar, we do have a limudim. It says tar le'yaveh al roshai. We know there the Torah specified tar. And we say, if this is the halacha by Nazir Tar, who are by Nazir Tomei? In other words, we're saying they're similar. So if that's the case, then Leisi Nazir Tar, V'leilef Nazir Tomei. Ma'tomei kishayir shtei shayir v'lei klum avit, hachanami kishayir shtei shayir v'lei klum avit. So clearly, both Nazir Tomei and Nazir Tar are the same. And of course, the Torah said, Sai by Nazir Tar, Sai by Nazir Tomei, that you can't leave over anything. So we have the same limud. Since the Torah had to specify by Nazir, you can't leave over anything. Vice the choice, if it wasn't for this special halacha, we would say Rubai Kakulai. Boy Abai. Abai had a very interesting shayla. Nazir shagilach the shire shtei cyrus. And Nazir made giluach and he left over 2 hairs. So that's not a good giluach. It doesn't work. So now he has to go back to cut those 2 hairs. But by the time he went to cut the 2 hairs, samach roishai. The hair that he already cut grew in, and then the chazav gilchan, and then he cut those 2 hairs. So do you say it counts? Mao mima akfir loy. Is it a problem that by the time he cut those 2 hairs, the other hairs had already grown in a little bit? So that's shayla number 1. Boy Rava, Nazir shagilach v'nich shtei cyrus. A Nazir that did giluach and he left over 2 hairs. The gilach achas, he only cut one of them. The noshra achas, and the other one fell out. What would be the halacha? So Rabbi Achim told him, what type of shayla is that? I don't understand. Gilach Saira come by. In other words, Kleimar Hashniya Mao. I'm sorry. Here's Rabbi Achim. Bitmir Kleimar Havada Giluach. That's for sure Giluach. Kivin Shabbalah Galeach have a seer Giluach. What's he supposed to have a seer Giluach? When he came to cut off the hair, the other hair was gone already. So he cut all the remaining hairs. So how could you suggest that shouldn't be a good giluach? Zok to Gemara, gilach sari come by the Rabba Ella Ema. I'll tell you what it was. It was noshra achas the gilcha achas now. First a hair fell out, and then he cut off the remaining one. Zok Toises kishabola galeich seer. The other one was already cut out. Ma, what will be halacha? So he said, the gears here is messed up. We have to see the lashon and Tosfos.
One shear and one stain.
Uh-huh.
So the last word in the previous Tosfos have a shear beneath because two hairs is called
A shear. Uh-huh.
When one fell out and then you have only one, that's
so there's no shear, so therefore he can't be mekaymet. Here, I'm sorry. Okay. So Zok Gemara.
One has a book, one has
I hear. Omer le geluch enkan, siar enkan. Okay, so here it's without the book. Isir enkan, yesh kan geluch. Hachi kamar. Aval piece of seer enkan mitzvah giluach enkan. Kloimar the betaglachas rishona shire beisayir. Since when he made the original taglachas, he left over 2 years. With taglachas zois lahoya rak sar echad. So I have to look into this. I didn't prepare this. I'm not sure what the shaila is, what the sheet is. Let's try this again. Rav Adashal, notice the gilach v'niach shtei sayros, the gilach achas v'nosher achas. He ended up cutting one, and the other one fell out. Ma what talok? Rabbi Medifti didn't like his shaila. Amalei Rabbi Medifti lerina gilach sayra comes boile the Rava. So again, what is the problem with Rava shaila? So let's see this inside. Nazir, I'm sorry. Where's the Mefarish? Gilach Saib Boiler Rava Pshita. The Kivin the Gilach that's called Roishoy, since he already cut off all the hair on his head, Levar Mehanach Bei Cyrus, except for those two. The Chihada Gilach Achas Mehen, if he then returned to cut one of the two, the Noshra Chaverta, and the other one fell out, Shapir. It's for sure good because of the Miglach Urcha. Command the Azul Miglach Thyroid. He's cutting his hair like a normal person. Well, he did not show him I have a little of it. So why should it be a problem? It surely should be a good Giluach. So because of that, the Gemara changed around the Shaila. Rather than saying after he cut off the second to the last hair fell out, let's say the last hair fell out before he cut off the second to the last hair. So why should that make a difference? So let's see the Mefarish. Mi amrinon. Even the whole Sire Gilach, Chutz Misar Achas, since he cut off every hair on his head, except for that one hair, Shaper Dummy, that would be a good Giluach. The Haloi Shire, Shtei Cyrus below Giluach. The fact of the matter is, there were not 2 hairs left over that weren't cut. Or maybe, even the Mikar Shire Loi Shtei Cyrus, since originally left 2 Cyrus, Laf Klum of it. Now, the original Giluach wasn't a Giluach at all. The chichazar v'gilach achas la'achar neshirasa the chaverta, and even if you go and you cut off the last hair after the second to the last hair already fell out, nami lav klum avid, that's not considered a giluach. Why? The kivin the have a hash to beroishay elasayra achas. Since at the time when he cut off that last hair, there was only 1 hair there, which is not required for giluach. So it's too late to do giluach anymore. Lo ikri giluach. It's like they both fell out, so you never were Makayim the mitzvahs giluach. The gilach, the shire sire achas, sharper gilach. Just like we say that if you cut up all the hairs except for one, that's considered a complete giluach. The sire kanatula damya, you ignore the last hair. Hachanami, by the same token, kinoshra achas mishas nishirusa have a charved kanatula. The moment the second to the last hair fell out, now the last hair is considered like it's gone already. So so now it's too late. Even if you cut that last hair is not significant. So you have an incomplete giluach that you have no way of correcting. So what did he answer? So again, our gears here is a little bit messed up. I'll read the Bach and then I'll read the Farish, I guess. So the Bach says, Sar enkan, giluach enkan. So let's see what he says. Amalei. Amit giluach enkan, the damilei kemei sheyes ser bekan. I'm not sure what it's saying. I'm not sure how he's even gurs. Hachikamina av bishaser enkan, mitzvah giluach enkan, umiyu b'di'evet chaperdon. So he's saying that ser enkan giluach enkan, they won't be a mitzvah giluach, right? Av bishaser enkan, even though there's no hair left. But still, mitzvah giluach enkan, you weren't mekayim the mitzvah of giluach. Yet the Mefarish still says that with the eved it will work. Right? Is that what he says over here? Maybe the eved chaperdom. Let's see what Toshma says over here. Hoil the betaglachas rishoyna shari beis sayers the betaglachas zois loyerak sayachod. He doesn't have a giluach. So if he doesn't have a giluach, so I'm not sure what the loch is. It's not considered a good giluach, but the Mefarish says with the eved will be good. So it's considered that he finished the process and he could become Ois Mitzayah, but I guess he lost the mitzvah of the Giluach, but he's still considered cured. Toshus doesn't say anything about the end. Okay, Gavaltik. We do have a couple of minutes, There's one very, very important Tosfos that I wanted to learn, which sort of summarizes the approach of Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. Remember, the Rabbanan held that the issue to cut your beard is only with a tar, while Rabbi Eliezer held it's with anything, and therefore the Rabbanan used Zekanai as the makar that Mitzayra needs a tar, and Rabbi Eliezer had to use Roisha. So let's see this Tosfos over here. It's like the fourth intermediate line. Talmud Leimer Sayrosha Miyuser. Daf Nazir uMitzayra Chayv Legaleach B'tar. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he's learning that if someone's a Mitzayra, he has a chiyuv to shave his head, even if he's a Nazir, and shaving his head is forbidden with al-av and an asay, Roisha tells you that the Mitzayra should do it anyway. The high delay Mulki Rabbi Eliezer Roisha. For Roisha the Chaladam, who said that when it says Roisha in the pasuk, it means to tell you that even the Nazir's hair you're allowed to cut. Maybe you're only allowed to cut a regular guy's hair. V'loy Nazir. And the chiddush of the pasuk is ulu mitchi lav dakafa greda. Maybe all you see from the pasuk is that the mitzvah of a mitzvah cutting his hair is doicha, the standard issue of loisakifu. But how do you know that it'll even be doicha, the asay and loisaseh that exists by a nazir? Zokt toisus imishum the spherele hakafas kolaroish loishma kafa. First of all, could be Rabbi Eliezer holds that you don't need a pasuk to tell you that the mitzvah is allowed to cut all his hair off, because that wouldn't even violate Lasakifu, because maybe he holds that Lasakifu is not applying if the whole hair is cut off. Or Imishum, the Asi, the Asay, Dachi Loisase, Nafkala Rabbi Eliezer, Begdilim, Kedibasama. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't need this pasuk to tell you Asay, Dachi Loisase. He has a different source for it. Imkain, therefore, Roishay Lo Istrich, Elul Roishay de Nazir. The only chiddush we can extract out of Roishay is if it's telling us that even a Nazir has to cut his hair if he's a Mitzayra being Mitzayra himself. Afagav dika lav the tar lo yavar ve'asei the gadel pera. Even though you have two things, your asay and your loisaseh, still dochilahu asay the gilach, the asay of the gilach by Mitzayra is doiche the loisaseh and asay by Nazir miyitura the roisha the chsiv Mitzayra. Since it says roisha as well. Hashka nafkele the Rabbi Eliezer. So now let's see how the chips fall. According to Rabbi Eliezer, come to Chosh, how do you know that the chiyuv giluch for the with the tar? It's because of Nazir. The midi the aser ben Nazir lahaver tar al roishai hitain b'mitzayra legalech b'tar. The very thing that's aser by a mitzayra is what the Torah is telling you. So the very thing that's aser by a Nazir, the Torah is commanding you to do if you're a mitzayra. The hainu de kamahadi b'braisa la'il. And this is what we said earlier in the Brisa, L'meilev tar b'mitzayra milavim v'nazir mindina v'lo asalei. Remember, at the end of the Brisa yesterday that we learned, we tried to learn mitzayra from a combination of Levim and Nazir, and we slugged it up, v'lo asalei. It didn't work because we had a kasha, Levim and Nazir, there's no sliding scale of what type of carbon you can bring. There is, but the mitzayra. Where does Rabbi Eliezer learn that Mitzayra has to be with a tar? You learn it out of Roshai. The source where you know by Mitzayra that a tar is required is from Nazir. The Sover Leila Rabbi Eliezer, the Nazir Leilaki Elabatar Davka Krabyonis on the Lil. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer is going to have to hold a Krabyonis on that the prohibition for a Nazir to cut his hair is only with a tar. Hilchach, Midi the Asr ben Nazir. The tar, the very act that's also for a Nazir to do, hidden Mitzayra the Masha. The Torah was mechayiv you to do when you're a Mitzayra. The al shar mavirin nami lilke ben Nazir. If you're going to say that Rabbi Eliezer holds that by a Nazir it's prohibited to remove your hair in any way, akati lo yadin entire ben Mitzayra, then we'll never know a source for the chiyuv for a Mitzayra to use a tar. The klamemer kraderasha l'shar mavirin. You could say that Rashi is telling you, do the cutting, even though you're violating the Naziris, but not necessarily with a tar. Any way you cut it, you'll be violating the Naziris. Okay, Gavaltik, so we'll stop here.